President Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping met on Monday ahead of the G20 summit in Bali. The meeting comes at a time when tensions between the U.S. and China are high. But both Washington and Beijing have indicated the two sides are willing to keep the lines of communication open on a number of issues, including climate change and health and food security. Here's what President Biden had to say about President Xi following the talks.
Found him the way he's always been, direct and straightforward. And do I think he's willing to compromise on various issues? Yes. I think he understands that. I think the election held in the United States, which still leaves a little bit uncertain, has sent a very strong message around the world that the United States is ready to play.
For more on this, let's bring in CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes, who's traveling with President Biden in Bali. Nancy, things between the U.S. and China have been quite tense. The U.S. recently declared China a key strategic threat, and several weeks ago, the administration blocked exports of computer chips. So that's the tension side. Where do things stand after this meeting? Are tensions the same? Have they been eased, or are they heightened?
Well, at least the two leaders have now met face to face, John, and frankly, they were all smiles when they saw each other. They've known each other quite some time. They don't necessarily have a lot of personal animosity, even though the frustrations with each other between these two nations have really been piling up. So the fact that they now have had, for the first time since President Biden took office in 2020, a face-to-face meeting for more than 3 hours, that's being seen by both the U.S. and the Chinese, and frankly, by other world leaders as a very positive sign. No one seems to believe that it is in U.S. interest or China's interest to have the kind of level of tension that we've seen between these two nations over the past couple of years over so many topics. I mean, you listed off some of them, but then you take into account the war in Ukraine, Taiwanese independence, and the fact that the Chinese are stepping up military drills, trade, technology, spying, human rights. The barbs have just been going back and forth. In fact, there was even a period of time where the Chinese cut off communication with the U.S. after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan over the summer. This is something that has really rattled neighbors here in Asia and countries around the world. These are the world's two largest economic superpowers that can't seem to settle their differences. And both President Biden and President Xi Jinping were very explicit in this meeting when they spoke to reporters at the top to say that they want to try to improve this relationship, that they want to try to talk through these issues. They're not always going to agree. Of course, they're going to compete, but they don't want it to slip into conflict. They don't want it to slip into some kind of Cold War.
Well, let's stick on the question of Taiwan, which you raised. President Biden has seemed to increase the strength of the U.S. position with respect to Taiwan. And so there's been that traditional ambiguity, and then he's inserted a little bit of new ambiguity. Where does Taiwan stand after this meeting between these two leaders?
Well, I'd say that was the biggest area of tension coming out of the meeting, at least from the Chinese. They put out a really interesting statement that said that any U.S. interference in the China-Taiwan relationship would be viewed as a red line. That was probably the most strident message in this very long Chinese communique about how the meeting had gone down. That's something that they are very sensitive about. At the same time, President Biden came out of the meeting. He held a press conference, took questions from reporters, and said that he doesn't believe that China plans to imminently invade Taiwan and try to take over this self-governing island. He also made a point of saying that despite the fact that repeatedly on the world stage, he has said that, yes, the U.S. would defend Taiwan in the event that it was invaded by China. He made it clear in this press briefing that his position on the one China policy hasn't changed, and that is one of strategic ambiguity when it comes to the U.S. position on a Chinese invasion. There's no question that the Biden administration has been pretty ambiguous when it comes to exactly how far they would go to defend Taiwan.
Ambiguous indeed. Nancy Cordes in Bali, Indonesia. Thank you, Nancy.
You're welcome, John.